Hey guys, how's it going? Today's video is going to be basically some advice and tips, etc. on how to write characters with OCD. As many of you probably know, I myself am diagnosed with OCD. I am on daily medication, I've done lots of therapy, and obviously I have done a ton of research on my own. So even though I'm not an expert, I have quite a lot of knowledge and personal experience. Also, before we get into it, I just want to remind everybody that I'm still looking for beta readers for my novel Monsters and Imaginary Friends. The video and the sign-up form are linked down below, but sign-ups are going to be open until the end of today, Sunday, May 17th? Yeah. Realistically, I'm not going to actually close them until early tomorrow morning, but until tonight, first thing tomorrow morning, etc. So if you're interested in being a beta reader, definitely look up the information down below once you've done this video, of course. Also, I have an OCD playlist that I'm going to link above and below, and I specifically have a video about what OCD is and isn't. It's kind of just a quick overview and information about OCD in general. I'm not going to go in depth here on, definitions and the whole technical side of things, which brings me to my first tip: do research. Make sure that you're both researching from credible sources and from a variety of sources. You can also read Own Voices books by people with OCD, because those are just a really good way to really see it done from somebody who presumably has an idea what they're doing. And of course, make sure that once you're done your writing project, get sensitivity readers. That way you can make sure that you're not making any harmful assumptions, any negative stereotypes, or that you just got something wrong. But do keep in mind that everybody's experience with OCD is a little bit different, just like most mental illnesses. So try to get a variety of sources, because one person's OCD can be completely different than someone else's OCD. Another tip that really applies for any mental illness is that there is a difference between accepting and representing a mental illness compared to glorifying it. Do not glorify really any mental illness. Don't glorify OCD. It is not quirky and fun and a cute little character trait to add. It is terrible. It is debilitating sometimes, and it really friggin' sucks. So make sure that you're not glorifying it, but make sure that you're still being authentic about it and that you're still accepting it. Don't treat it as this horrible, horrible monster, because that leads into my next point. There is no cure for OCD. Because OCD doesn't have a cure, it is extra important not to make the happy ending some type of cure. This goes along with most mental illnesses, most disabilities, anything like that. Remember that people are living with this, and while it might seem a really happy ending for the character to wake up one morning and suddenly not have these thoughts in their heads, or, for example, a character who's in a wheelchair to be able to just suddenly walk, you might think that that's a happy ending, but you have to remember that that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with that character, and by putting in that happy ending, you're telling everybody that has that experience that they can't be happy yet, that they have to strive for this, which for a lot of people is impossible, and with OCD is impossible. Like I said, this is really important for any type of disability, chronic illness, mental illness, anything like that. Be very, very cautious how you fix it. The idea of being fixed is a lot of times really offensive. It means that, hey, something is wrong with you as you are. You as a person are broken. We're not. We struggle with things in different ways. Our brains don't quite work right in some aspects, but that doesn't mean that we're broken, and having a magic happy ending isn't realistic, and it can be really discouraging. You have to toe that line though, because you don't want to see the character suffering forever, because, that's just depressing. So I always prefer, personally, stories where the character gets a hold of it and they're able to cope with it, but it doesn't go away. Again, this kind of goes back to the line between acceptance and glorification. It's something that you have to accept, cope, and deal with. It's always going to be there, but that's okay. Your life can go on. So if you're writing something where treatment is an important part of the story, just be very, very careful with how you handle it, which is also why I think that relapse is something that should really be talked about more. Even when somebody has gone through treatment, and if they're on medication, if they've done therapy, they're still probably going to get more obsessions and compulsions over time. From my personal experience, I have found a medication and a dosage that is perfect for me. I have done a ton of therapy, I have done a ton of research, I know the tools and whatnot to be able to help my OCD the best that I can, but I'm still coming up with new obsessions all the time. My brain is still coming up with new compulsions. I'm able to ignore those I can't ignore Comet though, but I'm able to ignore the obsessions and the compulsions so much better, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. Because OCD doesn't have a cure, relapse is super common, because anytime you get a spiking anxiety, your OCD is also going to spike, and sometimes it's more than you can handle at the moment, or sometimes a new compulsion will come into your mind that you'll decide does make sense, or sometimes you're doing things that you don't even realize are your OCD. OCD is all about 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and then 3 steps forward and 5 steps back, because relapse isn't some type of failure. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not a good thing, but it's part of real life, and I think that should definitely be something that's addressed in more books. Speaking of treatment, if you're writing about OCD, you should definitely include the therapy aspect, because that is huge. That is how you learn how to deal with your OCD. And on top of that, remember that therapy is freaking terrifying. Therapy is really intimidating for a lot of people, but with OCD, cognitive behavioral therapy essentially means that you have to force your OCD and then try to resist it. So as an example, somebody that has cleanliness-based OCD, they may have to touch something dirty and then not be allowed to wash their hands. OCD is an anxiety disorder, so this type of therapy is terrifying. It is meant to be terrifying, because essentially your brain comes up with these things that it fears, which are the obsessions, and then creates this rule, this ritual that you have to perform to lessen that anxiety, which is your compulsion. It doesn't work. You think it works. Your brain convinces itself that it works, but it's just hammering in the fact that you need to be afraid of this. Obviously, this is done in baby steps. You don't just, jump into a dumpster and then not be allowed to bathe for a week. But just keep in mind that the therapy is going to be very, very difficult, and your character is going to be very scared. On a similar note, like I said, OCD is an anxiety-based disorder, so your character is probably going to be an anxious mess. Make sure that when you're doing your research, comment. Like I was trying to say, since OCD is an anxiety-based disorder, your character will also be dealing with a lot of anxiety. So make sure that you're also doing research into anxiety and how that feels, how it presents itself, and everything that entails, because the two will go hand in hand. Now, about the obsessions and the compulsions themselves, I find a lot of people kind of forget about the obsession side, because you see the compulsion for the most part. A lot of times there's mental compulsions, but you see somebody washing their hands over and over and over again. You see somebody rearranging something or relocking a door over and over and over. But the other half of that is the obsession. Now, sometimes an obsession doesn't have an obvious correlation to a compulsion and vice versa. It's usually there, but sometimes you don't know what it is, or it's something that's kind of subconscious. In the same vein as that, most compulsions have a reason. There's a logic behind it. That logic is flawed and it's usually wrong, but it doesn't matter. There's a logic that your brain has come up with. For me personally, I'm going to go with the example of my colored candy. People can see that I'm eating candy in a specific order. That's what's the visual part. That's what people know. But the whole backlog in my brain is that if I don't do it, somebody will die because of that annoying Smarties jingle, the something about eating the red ones last, looped in my brain and amplified, and then I decided that something bad will happen if I eat them last, and then I decided that it might be reverse psychology, so something bad will happen if I eat them first, and then because green's the opposite of red, then greens got lumped in there, and then because brown is the color of chocolate, it's not a real color when it comes to Smarties, and then that evolved into all types of candies, and it just obviously got out of control, but there is a reason behind it. Obviously, you're not going to need to spell out every single thing with your character, but if it's a first-person story with a point of view from the character with OCD, that should at least be mentioned. So going back to the example of somebody washing their hands all the time, that, if somebody sees it, they can see, oh, that's probably OCD, but it's the why that's really important to the character. Maybe someone they love got sick and now they're worried that they're going to touch something and pass germs along to somebody else. Maybe they learned about a new disease in school or something and now they're worried that they're going to get it unless they're extra careful. Things like that. It's not just that the character feels like having clean hands, there's an intense fear behind it, and they are washing their hands in an attempt to lessen that fear. When writing your character's obsessions and compulsions, remember that there are a couple different main categories, and while most people have from a variety of categories, there's usually 1 or 2 main categories that your character will fall under. I do recommend doing a little bit more research on this one because different sources call them by different names and sometimes they're categorized differently, and there's just a couple different ways that it can be done, so definitely do some outside research on it, but I'm just going to cover it based off of what I know and the research that I have done. To cover them quickly, we have contamination, which involves washing or cleaning rituals. This usually comes from a fear of contamination, so getting sick, passing along germs, stuff like that. And the compulsions that relate to that are usually about cleaning, disinfecting, things like that. The second one is harm obsession and a checking compulsion. So the harm and checking, basically the fear is of some harm coming to you, someone else, a loved one, etc. And the compulsion is to constantly be checking something. So for example, you could be really afraid of your house suddenly catching fire, so you have to check the oven over and over and over and over again. It could be somebody breaking into your house, so you have to check the lock over and over and over and over again. The next one is one that every time I look for it, it's called something else, but I usually just call it the doubters or sinners. Usually this one is about intrusive thoughts that come in that are wrong or bad, and then you think that there's something more behind it. This could be about an intrusive thought coming into your head that you might harm somebody or do something illegal or immoral, and then you're mentally like praying to yourself, soothing yourself, saying something over and over again. That's usually how this one comes about. The next category is the stereotypical OCD, ordering, arranging, counting, stuff like that. It could be patterns or things organized a specific way. I do want to point out though that this doesn't mean your character is clean. I know a lot of people with OCD that are slobs in a lot of areas. It doesn't necessarily mean that your house has to be spotless at all times. It might mean that your books have to be arranged in the order that you got them in, or that your clothes have to be arranged by color. Sometimes it isn't even anything specific, it just has to feel right, which is annoying because you can't explain it, and sometimes you have to keep adjusting it until it does feel just right. And again, this is to alleviate some type of anxiety that a lot of times has no relation to anything, like eating colored candies in a certain order so that my family won't die. The reasoning behind it is what makes it occasionally part of OCD, which is an excellent segue into my next point. A lot of symptoms of OCD are very relatable, which in theory makes it both really difficult and really easy to write about. Almost everybody has some sort of ritual or routine, a system that they like, and if you have personal experience with that, you can draw from that. But to make it OCD, you have to multiply it by 100 and add in a ton of anxiety. For example, maybe you really like having your bookcases organized alphabetically because it's nice, it's easy, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's easy to find things, whatever the reason may be. That isn't necessarily OCD, unless having them out of order causes you extreme anxiety and distress. And I don't just mean discomfort, because obviously it's going to bother you if the books that are usually in order all of a sudden aren't. But if it's going to give you a panic attack, if you feel like you can't continue with your day if you don't fix them right now, or something bad is going to happen if you don't fix them, that is probably OCD. Same thing with intrusive thoughts. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. That's just how brains work. Sometimes just thoughts will pop into your head. Sometimes we walk down the street and think, oh man, what if I jumped in front of that car right now? For someone with OCD though, we usually put a lot of importance on those thoughts. We think, okay, why did that thought pop into my head? Where did it come from? Who's thinking that thought? What's happening? And then it gets a loop of anxiety, and then you create a compulsion to get rid of that anxiety. Which is also why OCD is so misunderstood, because everything that is OCD are very common occurrences. Like I said, everybody has intrusive thoughts, everybody has rituals and routines, but it's the anxiety, the distress, the fact that it sometimes just completely gets in the way of your life that makes it OCD. So while you can put some of your personal experiences into this and understand it to a degree because of that, remember that OCD is an extreme. And now I'm going to end off with just a couple little things that I wish I saw more in OCD representation. So like I mentioned before, relapse, because it is something that is going to happen and it is something that I think should be shown more. Also, supportive parents and friends. I think that a lot of stories with mental illness, a lot of times it's younger people, teenagers, etc., and people don't get them, and people get annoyed with them because they don't understand. And while that is very realistic, I would love to see more cases of the parents understanding, or the parents learning what's going on and helping their kid, being supportive. I also want to see more types of OCD. I don't want to see just people organizing their pencils in a certain order and washing their hands all the time. Even though that is OCD, I want to see different aspects of OCD. And the last thing that I wish we saw more of with characters with OCD is the internal monologue behind it. Because I have these long, complex explanations and reasons and origins for most of my OCD habits and rituals, And it would just be nice to see other characters do that. If you have any questions about anything I said, or if you want any more information or clarification on anything, definitely comment down below, or you can also DM me. My Twitter's linked in the description, but it's at TehBuggy. And if you have OCD, let me know if there's anything that you disagree with that I said, anything that your experience says otherwise, anything that you want to add, because obviously, like I said, everybody's experience is so different that the more voices we get chiming in, the more big picture we see, and the better this gets for everybody. And again, a quick reminder that my beta reader sign up is open until the end of today, which realistically is going to be first thing tomorrow morning. But if you are interested in beta reading Monsters and Imaginary Friends, that video and the form to sign up are going to be down below. So that is all for today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, please click the like button to let me know, and subscribe to stay up to date with the rest of my videos. I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, usually reading or writing related. So I hope to see you guys next time, and until then, have a great day. Bye.